Hi, everyone. This is Global Podcast, your window to the world. Breaking news, big ideas, your global hangout for what's happening now, and bold conversations. Wherever you are, we're bringing it to you. Let's get started.
Okay, so you've brought us some really interesting material today. We've got these excerpts about President Trump's recent comments on Iran, and then details on these upcoming talks in Oman, right? April 12th.
That's right, April 12th, 2025 in Muscat. And, we're aiming to go beyond just the headlines here.
Yeah, definitely not just another news report. We want to dive deep. What's really going on? What are the core issues, the stakes for the region? Maybe even, wider than that. That's what we're focusing on today.
Exactly. We have these different pieces, Trump's statements, the setup for the talks. Our mission really is to unpack all of that. Look at the positions, the history, because you have to understand the history here and the big challenges they're facing heading into these indirect talks.
Right, indirect. We'll get to that. So let's start with President Trump. What's his stated position based on what you shared? What's the first impression?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? There's this apparent contrast. He talks about wanting Iran to be a great and happy country. Almost sounds friendly,
It does, yeah. Surprisingly so, maybe. But then, like you said, there's always a but. You dig a bit, and there's a very clear condition attached to that vision.
A very firm one. His absolute insistence. Iran must never obtain nuclear weapons. So it's like, sure, be happy, be great, but this specific thing, absolutely not. It's a hard line.
And he uses this phrase, verified nuclear peace agreement. That sounds specific. What does verified signal to you there?
Oh, verified is doing a lot of work in that phrase. It means proof, hard proof, reliable checks, something, that's likely going to be a huge sticking point in Oman. And peace agreement sounds broader, too, maybe suggesting something beyond just the nuclear file eventually.
Possibly. But it's all tied to that one condition. No nuclear weapons. Only then, he suggests, can Iran have peaceful growth and prosperity.
Precisely. It's conditional prosperity he's offering.
Then at the same time, he's pushing back against reports of imminent military action, calling them greatly exaggerated. What's the message there, do you think?
Well, maybe a couple of things. Could be trying to lower the temperature, signal, diplomacy first. Or maybe it's strategic, don't make them feel immediately cornered, which might backfire. But then
comes the warning.
Yeah.
Serious consequences if they do try to build them. So diplomacy is preferred, but the military option isn't gone. It's still there if he feels talks fail.
That's the takeaway, I think. It's this mix, wanting a deal, but holding that military threat in reserve. It creates a kind of deliberate uncertainty for Iran to navigate.
Okay, so that sketches out the U.S. stance, or at least Trump's recent framing of it. Let's pivot to the talks themselves. April 12th, Muscat. You mentioned, and the sources confirmed, they're indirect talks, even though Trump apparently mentioned direct talks somewhere else. What does indirect tell us straight away?
It tells us a lot. The fact that they need Oman's foreign minister, Badr al-Busaidi, to mediate, it just screams mistrust, doesn't it?
Yeah. Direct talks imply a certain readiness to engage face-to-face. Going indirect feels much more cautious, maybe even fragile.
Exactly. It highlights just how deep the problems are, how careful both sides are being right at the start.
And who are the main people involved? The ones actually doing the talking, even if indirectly.
So for Iran, it's their foreign minister, Abbas Araqi, and for the U.S., Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. They're the key figures carrying the weight in Muscat.
Okay. Let's get down to brass tacks then. What are they each bringing to the table? What does the U.S. want out of this?
Well, number one for the U.S. has to be solid proof, verifiable proof that Iran isn't building nukes, not just promises. They'll want strict limits, probably on uranium enrichment, maybe intrusive checks. And then there's the other piece, Iran's regional role. The U.S. wants them to pull back support for proxies like Hezbollah. That's a big one mentioned in the sources. They see these groups as destabilizing.
Those are definitely major asks. What about Iran? What are they looking for in return?
For Iran, it's likely two core things. First, security. They want real guarantees against military attacks from the U.S. or, its allies. That's fundamental for them, given the history.
Makes sense. And the second?
Sanctions relief. Major, significant relief from those crippling economic sanctions. That economic pressure is immense, so easing it is probably top of mind.
It sounds like a very classic standoff, almost. Security versus economic benefits.
Yeah.
But like you said earlier, you can't really grasp this without the history, can you? The context is just vital here.
Absolutely vital. You have to look back. The 2015 nuclear deal, the JCPOA, that's the big shadow hanging over all of this. For anyone needing a quick refresher, what was that deal essentially about?
Right, the JCPOA.
Yeah.
Basically, Iran agreed to roll back its nuclear program quite significantly. Verified limits, inspections, the whole thing. And in return, international sanctions, the ones related to the nuclear program, were lifted. It took years to negotiate that.
Years of work. And then, fast forward to 2018, President Trump pulls the U.S. out. What were his main arguments for doing that?
He argued the deal was flawed. Didn't last long enough, didn't cover Iran's ballistic missiles, didn't address its regional action supporting those proxies we mentioned. So he withdrew the U.S. and reimposed sanctions, American sanctions, which really ramped up the tension again.
And things haven't exactly calmed down since. The sources mention recent U.S. intelligence, concerns that Iran might be speeding up its uranium enrichment. What's the worry there?
Yeah, that's a big red flag. Faster enrichment shortens the breakout time, basically. How quickly Iran could theoretically get enough material for one bomb if they decided to go for it. So that intelligence just adds, well, urgency.
And one other factor mentioned, Israeli strikes against Iranian proxies in the region. How might that play into these talks?
Well, the thinking might be that those strikes could have weakened Iran's hand regionally, maybe making them more amenable to negotiation, or perhaps more determined to resist. It adds another layer of complexity, really.
Definitely complex. So, putting it all together, the history, the recent tensions, what are the biggest roadblocks you see for these talks in Oman? The potential deal breakers? Well, that basic disagreement on format, we talked about Trump wanting direct, Iran insisting on indirect, that's more than just procedure, right?
Yeah, it signals that fundamental lack of trust, especially from Iran's side after the JCPOA withdrawal.
Yeah.
They signed a deal, the U.S. left. It makes starting over incredibly difficult.
Exactly. It shows how fragile this whole thing is right from the get-go. Building trust now, that's a massive hurdle.
What else? Beyond the trust issue.
Iran's just deep, deep skepticism about U.S. motives. They're probably looking at the U.S. demands enrichment limits, curbing regional allies, and seeing it as, an attempt to undermine their whole strategy, their security. Convincing Tehran that Washington isn't just aiming for regime change or permanent containment, that's a monumental challenge.
And the stakes, as the sources emphasize, are just incredibly high. This isn't a minor diplomatic shuffle. The outcome in Oman could really shift things in the Middle East, couldn't it?
Hugely. For better or potentially for worse. It could lead towards maybe some de-escalation, a bit more stability, or it could fail and lead to more conflict, more uncertainty.
Yeah, it's quite the tightrope. You have Trump saying he wants a happy Iran, but also drawing that absolute red line on nuclear weapons, all against this backdrop of, well, decades of bad blood and regional turmoil.
Precisely. That's the core tension right there.
So, thinking about all this, the history, the positions, the mistrust, it leaves you wondering, doesn't it? What would actually count as strong proof for the U.S. that Iran isn't going for nukes? What kind of verification would actually satisfy them?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? What does that look like in practice? And flipping it around, what guarantees could the U.S. give that Iran would actually believe? Guarantees about security, about the economy, that would convince Tehran this isn't just another temporary fix.
Exactly. What would it take for them to trust the U.S. commitment this time? These are the really thorny issues the negotiators are facing in Muscat.
They really are. And understanding this whole tangle, the history, the interests, the suspicions, it's just crucial if you want to make sense of what's happening in the Middle East and how it connects to, the bigger global picture. These talks, they feel like that could be a real turning point.
For sure. The story we'll definitely be keeping a close eye on. The implications could be felt for years.